So I'm driving with Dave Ritchie around Kelowna, his hometown. He's showing me, this is where I live. This is where I used to play lacrosse. This is where my friends and I played hockey, everything. I was getting this full tour. And at the same time, he's talking about, the furniture store and how business started. It was just a phenomenal sort of hour and a half or 2 hours.
Welcome to episode 40 of the Crownsman podcast. I'm your host, Jared Downey. My co-host is Gowdy Molina.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Excited to start our podcast again after a little tiny break. It was a very tiny break, but feels like it was so long.
I think we're on a hiatus. We were not. we partnered up with CIM. They to do mining now. So you're going to see that rolling out there pretty quick. So we were away in Kamloops at the MIMO event doing that, which is it's a little bit of a different format. It's a shorter show and it's very technical. So we partnered up to do that. So that's where we've been. But we are coming back with a bang. We are going to feature Ritchie Brothers on the episode today. And representing Ritchie Brothers is the president of Canada, Kieran Holm. I did it.
Thanks. Well done. Well done. Even I can make that mistake.
Practicing.
So it's an understatement to say we're excited to have Ritchie Brothers on. And
excited to be here.
When I was telling you about us, getting you on the show and part of it for me was I grew up in the heavy industry sector, mostly mining. Now we work a little bit in oil and gas and things like that. And Ritchie Brothers was almost, for lack of a better word, the fantasy company. You would talk to people. I'll go to shows and they'll talk about Ritchie Brothers. Sort of, it's like the dream that the guys, especially in the older generations that started these companies. It shows. I think Dave Ritchie showed what you could accomplish if you have basically a limitless vision.
Sure.
So it's really exciting for me to just be able to walk through some of what Ritchie Brothers has accomplished. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Did you just get back?
I just moved back to Vancouver from Chicago at the end of August, the beginning of September, and I've been gone now from Vancouver for 11 years. I moved away in 2008 and just got back. So it's great to be home.
Yeah, good. Well, welcome. Before we start the show, we have some sponsors, so we're going to give a shout out to them.
Yes.
So let's kick that off, Gowdy.
All right. First up, we've got Ashdown Capital. Ashdown Capital works with businesses looking to increase or access working capital, purchase equipment for growth, undertake new development, or to invest in real estate. They can help their clients every step of the way, and you can visit them at ashdowncapital.ca, and you'll see their information below. We also actually have a new, what would we call it? A new...
It's basically just a further expansion of the Crownsman podcast.
Yes. So can you tell me more about that?
Okay, I'll take a swing at it. So it's called HIT 2020, and what it stands for is Heavy Industry Tour 2020.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to take the Crownsman podcast on the road. We love being in the studio, but especially after coming back from mining now, just the energy of being live at events, and we're in an interesting time in Canada as well. We're done the election and all that sort of stuff. So now we're sort of like kind of getting back to work.
Yeah.
And we want to feature the cities where these companies, because right now we just feature the company. So now we're going to feature the cities where these companies operate. So the people, the experience. So we're planning on going all over BC and Alberta. And we're going to do 20 cities.
Wow.
3 companies per city. So a total of 60 in 2020. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be excitement. We're dealing with one. I won't drop names yet until we have stuff established. But the one gentleman who we're working with, he's setting us up in a bar. We're going to do sort of a local event. It's just going to be. It's just kind of combining all of industry. We call it the voice of industry because it is about people.
Yeah, that's right.
And the communities. So watch for that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Perfect.
Okay, getting on to the show. I want to start with the history of Ritchie Brothers because it goes back so far, but it's an interesting company because it's always there's always something new.
Yeah.
But a lot of people watching will know where it all started. But can you give us that 1958 story?
Yeah, sure. So Ritchie Brothers started 1958. The Ritchie family, owned a furniture store in Kelowna, BC. And the story goes that they owed a note to the bank, and the bank called it, and they needed to raise some money quickly. And the fastest way to raise it was to hold an auction. So they gathered everything into a hall and said, "Okay, we're going to hold an auction." And the locals came out and supported them, and they actually made the money that they needed to and could repay it. And they decided, you know what, this is pretty good. So they started to do that. 3 brothers and the parents, they started to do that, and the better they got at it, the more other people started to take notice. And after a while, people said, "Can you help us with an auction?" And then in 1963, of course, they got their first heavy equipment spread. And that sort of launched them into, okay, the furniture's nice, but heavy equipment is the place to be. And that was Radium Hot Springs. It's where we got our color orange from, was that auction. It's where we held, the first ramp sale, because, of course, it was pouring rain. They're up in the mountains and pouring rain, and they decided they couldn't make people walk around. So they would actually drive, get a tent, get people under that, and then drive the equipment in front of them so they would be more comfortable. And we've been doing the ramp auction ever since.
Wow.
It's crazy. It really is. Later in the show, and I don't always usually do this on the show. I just kind of let us wind away, but I want to tell the audience sort of where this show is going, because there's some really important things we're going to touch on. We're going to talk about the integration and impact of technology on Ritchie Brothers. We're going to talk about some of the major acquisitions you've made, and we're going to talk about your career. You've been with them for
15 years.
15 years. And we're going to dovetail that with a little bit more about Dave Ritchie. So if you're watching the show, please stay with us, because we're going to cover a lot. And I want to move into this, and I'm going to try to do it lineal, but I might jump around a bit.
Sure.
The expansion into the United States, that was, what year was that, 1970?
Yeah, early 70s, and West Coast, they moved south. And for the brothers, this is a bit of a turning point, because Dave's got this vision that the company can expand beyond the BC Alberta borders and go elsewhere, and the U.S. makes the most sense. But the brothers are reluctant to take on the risk, because everything was risk to expand your business. And Dave pushed through, and ultimately, right, the U.S. is a big portion of our business today. He had the vision to go there early in those days. That really set the company up for that big growth expansion in the 70s and the 80s that put them on the track to where they are.
And then, actually, Gary, would you mind bringing up? I put a link in there. Would you mind bringing it up just so I can reference the some of it visually as well? The
About us.
the history, yeah, that one right there. Thank you.
There we go.
And this is what I find interesting about these timelines. You go the first auction happens in 1958, and then you go 1970 expansion into the U.S. So you're 68, you're 12 years. That seems pretty reasonable.
Sure.
But then in 76, now we're going over to Europe.
Right.
And this is before a lot of the technology in that. So
Yeah.
absolutely. This is manually.
You had to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So have you sort of, obviously you weren't there at the time, but have you sort of heard about that history of them making those choices?
Yeah, is again very interesting. Dave and partners have come in, and Mark Clark at the time and others were saying, we need to expand into Europe, and Dave believed in Europe, believed very much that was another good market. And so he and the partners decided they would take on an auction sale, and that's usually what it was always led by, was you found that A1 starter package on which you could build that event. And so you built around it, and it was anchored in a particular location with it might have a particular theme to it. And then you went and found everybody around there who had surplus equipment that they wanted to turn into cash. And you said, hey, we have this fantastic opportunity for you. And, we're going to bring this huge marketing push that's going to bring the buyers in. And that's, once people saw this huge crowd and all the excitement around it, and people came for bargains because it was an unreserved auction, which at the time was a bit unusual. And really unreserved is the underpinning. That's the whole driver for this is, if you think you're going to get a deal, you show up. When you put your hands, you get excited, you put your hand in the air, you might pay as much as you thought you might. You might pay more. You might pay less, but you never knew, so you had to be there. And that really
So unreserved, what does that mean?
Means that the equipment will sell to the highest bidder no matter what the price. So there's no reserve. There's no buyback, so we don't allow the owner to bid on their own equipment at a Ritchie Brothers Auctioneer sale.
Okay.
That's going to sell to the highest bidder. And that was at the core of what Dave's belief, that the auction business wasn't necessarily clean and straightforward and transparent. And so Dave really wanted to bring that transparency to the industry. And so he put at the base of it the idea that it had to be unreserved. And ultimately, that's the marketing hook that people saw this opportunity to go and buy equipment at the price they felt was reasonable. They determined the suitability and condition and value to their own satisfaction, and they bid accordingly. If you get carried away and you pay a little bit more, that's that's okay.
That's the fun.
Oh.
of
That's
auction.
it. That's fun.
And then, and going back again, I like to look at the timeline, and it's going, okay, now we're going to Europe, but now 1990 and 94,
Right.
you do Europe,
Yep.
or sorry, Australia
Yep.
and Asia.
Yep. Yeah, and Australia, again, a great market, very similar, I think, in a lot of ways to Canada, in the sense that it's got a strong mining,
Construction, equipment,
and you've got sort of 3 or 4 major cities, and then your next tier of cities. So obviously Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, and then you go into South Australia and Perth out in the west. And so I think we saw the personality of the people and everything else to be very similar to Ritchie Brothers. So we go into that, and from Australia, it's a nice springboard into Asia. And for us, that started in the Philippines and went on from there.
Yeah, that's and then you go to the Middle East, and again, this is one of the things that I'm finding fascinating. But I mean, we can't walk through every one, or this will be a very long show. But there is a cultural aspect of, I mean, this is, again, a lot of this is before, I think skipping down, online bidding starts. So this is before all the online
Correct.
bidding. So there is a cultural element. I've been to the Philippines. My wife's Filipino, so I've been there several times. It is a different culture. Australia is going to be, there is a similarity to it, but there's differences. But now you're going to the Middle East. There's this cultural, almost this willingness for Ritchie Brothers to really have no limit to where they're going to go culturally either.
Well, and I think I agree with you that there are lots of elements of each one of those cultures that are unique.
Yeah.
The one sort of commonality that I would see in all of those is the desire to get a deal. And everybody globally wants to feel like they're paying the right price for something. And so that unreserved aspect sort of creates, and this is what attracted me to the company when I joined in 2004, it's frictionless. So it's a frictionless marketplace. The seller and the buyer are not negotiating over the terms, the condition, or suitability. It's the seller saying, no matter what it brings, I'm willing to sell it. So you have 100% on one side of the equation, you have a 100% committed seller. On the other side of the equation, you have a 100% committed buyer. When they put their hand in the air, they've agreed that they've inspected it and they know what they're buying. And so they put their hand in the air. And to me, that was just a way of reducing all the friction that exists in a lot of transactions. And again, early days when I joined in 2004, it was early days. We'd only been doing internet simulcast bidding for 2 years. And so this is the way that we could break down some barriers between cultures, between markets. If it was a down market in Western Canada, maybe Eastern Canada was an up market. Maybe the Southern United States needed the equipment. So equipment, the nice thing about it is it's transportable. Typically, it can move across borders, across oceans, where it needs to go.
That's that's a nice lead into the next part, where is 2002. Things go online,
Mhm.
and like you said, that equipment needs to go places, but people at one time, correct me if I'm wrong, they had to physically go. And I've heard lots of stories
Sure.
about the people going, again, growing up,
Sure.
Savinaw equipment, and so my father's been to plenty of auctions. A lot of my connections have been to the auctions, and it was a physical thing you go to.
Yep.
That must have just, I don't know how quickly, I guess that's part of my question. How quickly did all of a sudden you go online, and now it is all of a sudden one piece of equipment has essentially global opportunity
Yep.
to access that piece of equipment?
Right. Yeah, the story goes that prior to the launch in 2002 at Con Expo, a group of senior executives are sitting around and talking about, do our customers need this? Are our customers going to adopt this? And the feeling was, and I think somebody put their hand in the air and said that maybe 10% of the the purchases would be made online, and people thought, you're crazy, it's never going to happen. But we have seen where that's grown, but it takes time for people to get comfortable with the fact that you're going to buy something online. We still see today where people go and physically inspect the equipment or have somebody inspect it on their behalf. It isn't, at the end of the day, used equipment. But they're able to sort of create time for themselves by going back to the office, continuing to do what they do for a living, and then bidding for that equipment online. For us, it was a way of exposing our consigners' equipment to a global audience in a way that was more efficient. So those buyers in Asia or in Europe who were bidding on equipment in North America could do so using a third party to go and look at it. They could look at pictures online. They could read descriptions, and then they can make the decision for themselves whether they think that equipment is appropriate.
Yeah. Have you sort of, what do you think the conversation was? Someone like Dave Ritchie, do you have any sort of concept of how he felt about the online world as it came in?
I Dave was such a visionary in the early days of this that I imagine anything that somebody brought that he thought could, gather more exposure for the consigner's equipment was going to be a benefit. He may not have thought that it was going to be what it became. Nobody probably did, but he certainly wasn't going to stand in the way of what was a good technological advancement. And I'd say that years before that, we had done effectively a simulcast for 3 sites for a trucking company dispersal with 3 sites where we'd link them by telephone. And so we actually had the ability to bid from all 3 sites via telephone. And you learn, the limits of technology as you go into it. And certainly as we because we do auctions at sites and we do auctions off-site, and you learn along the way what technologies function better or worse in certain environments, and then you make you make the adaptations that you need to make the business work.
It's Ritchie Brothers now, though. I mean, at one time it's a brick and mortar. I mean, would it be fair to say it's as much a tech company now as a brick and mortar?
In a lot of ways, it's where technology gets supported by its physical infrastructure,
Right.
or where the physical infrastructure is supported by the technology. And I think if you look at a lot of the online companies, they've had to build out a physical infrastructure to support them. So Amazon with its distribution centers, on and on. Some companies, we're very fortunate. Our site network created a site effect long before there was such a thing. So the fact that you had a brand that was well recognized and respected in the industry with Ritchie Brothers, and you put the flags up in a new site, Liverpool or in Moerdijk or wherever we were opening around the world, that came with it a certain expectation, but also a certain comfort level. When you went online with that, then those same customers could say, okay, I recognize the brand. I'm going to get more comfortable with the fact that I'm going to be bidding online, and I can rely on this being true.
There was one thing that I wanted to. I want to circle back to some of the timeline stuff in a bit, but there was something that I actually didn't know about until I just started doing the research for the interview, and that was it was the Ritchie Brothers Asset Solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And could you just explain a little bit
Sure.
more about what that is?
Sure. So, for some of our customers, the way that they manage their fleet or their inventory is via spreadsheet. Frankly, so there hasn't. Maybe there isn't the opportunity to leverage technology in a way that helps them get better visibility into the fleet or inventory that they have on hand, to make easy transfers between divisions or departments. The asset solutions piece is giving us an opportunity to use some of our software development capability to put into those companies a way of managing that inventory or that fleet. And then as they sort of manage that fleet, they may come across opportunities for or needs for disposition. And then we would have disposition channels that they can easily access through that. So it's a new business for us. It's a new vertical that we have introduced just in the last little while. We're seeing a great need for it in the marketplace today. We like to say, we're disrupting the Excel spreadsheet with that.
Is that so? When you say new, how new is that?
Oh, just in the last sort of year or so is all. And what we have is, Ritchie Brothers has over the past little while acquired some different companies with, some have a really strong technological side. And so we leverage those capabilities. We see, okay, well, if we take our equipment knowledge and our customer base and we couple it with technology, what can we do? So we can incubate like a smaller business inside.
So was that bits and pieces from some of these acquisitions plus in-house development to develop something and we'll put it up on the website so people can visit and check it out without going into it too much here. But was that sort of an integration of a whole bunch? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I want to be careful that I don't say bits and pieces about, I got those fellas, Tim Schulte and Mascus in Europe was an acquisition, with Iron Planet and Jeff Barkelhall and team that are in Pleasanton. So you have two groups, one in sort of the Silicon Valley and the other in Amsterdam, that have really good technologies that they apply to their markets. We're then able to sort of lay side by side what our strengths are and then say, okay, what can we build out of that? And so, yeah, they are offshoots of those technologies.
And that's launched, right? Like that's active.
Yep.
And so is that sort of like in any company can sort of, is that like a membership thing? And
it's not a membership.
I should have done more research.
That's
before
fine.
I did it, but
at present, we are actually either approaching or being approached by companies. Like anything, you want to make sure that you can deliver on what you've promised. And so that bringing it to scale and everything requires, in certain times, customization and whatnot. And I'm by no means an expert in this respect. And anyone from my company who's watching this show will be nodding their head vigorously. So we want to be thoughtful about where we roll it out and when, and make sure that we're doing the right thing for our customers.
Yeah, it's just when I looked at it, I thought that's a pretty interesting thing because for me, again, coming out of that equipment, I know some of that. I've inventoried stuff.
Right.
I've manually been putting stuff in that.
Yep.
And I thought if Ritchie Brothers is sort of sharing some of those tools and that knowledge, also knowing about some of these acquisitions, I thought that's going to be a pretty handy tool for a lot of companies.
Absolutely.
Gowdy, we're going to do a quick shout out to two of our other sponsors because we can't do the show without them. Nor do we want to. We have some great companies that support us. So who are our other two companies? I'm saying like I don't know. Of course I know who they are.
Alrighty. So next up, we've got Savona Equipment. If you need anything from ball mills to conveyors to trommel, wash plants, and even electrical, go to savonaequipment.com. While you're there, you can check out their new equipment line of ST trommels and high G concentrators. And you can visit them at savonaequipment.com, where you'll find more equipment every day. And we also have Power Zone Equipment. When you need a specialized team of world-class engineers for your oil and gas pipelines, dewatering, or any fluid handling needs, you want to visit Power Zone Equipment. In addition to their inventory of rebuilt pumps, motors, engines, they also have an amazing team to design and engineer your systems no matter the challenge, no matter the location. Get in the zone with Power Zone, and you can visit them at powerzone.com. Awesome. Done.
Thank you. I noticed that the Power Zone one was all written in bold. I thought you were really gonna.
I think that was just the program. I think I was on caps lock.
Thank you to our sponsors. We really do appreciate your support and the support of
Absolutely.
people that listen, and it's a lot of fun doing the show. So thank you. Okay, some of these acquisitions. I am, to be frank, I've never, other than being part of buying one company, I've never actually been at that acquisition table and at such a large scale. Iron Planet is the first one I want to talk about because they were the other big auction company you saw around their marketing. I was getting hit with a few years ago. I was getting hit with their ads like crazy before the acquisition was, and there's a couple things. We talked a little bit about taking some of that technology and sharing it and that, so that's obviously a thing. But there's also the one thing that fascinates me about acquisition is that you have to merge culture together. And every company certainly develops its own culture, its own way of doing things, even the way people say good morning when they start their day. Everything's just always a little bit different from company to company. Were you hands-on? Were you kind of front line in any of those sort of things?
Well, so in the time that we did the acquisition of Iron Planet, I actually came back from Asia to the U.S. in 2017, just prior to close. So I wasn't part of the due diligence side of it, but I was certainly aware of the work that went into just what you're talking about. So in addition to doing the normal due diligence around financials or technology or what have you, you also want to take a look into cultural fit. And that requires also that you look at yourself and you understand your own culture to the same extent. So then, fast forward when we did the close, which is I think June of 2017, when we finally got permission from the U.S. government to do the acquisition. Then the actual hard work, I would say, of bringing the two companies together, and that's when, as much as you might have the plans in place, you actually have to go to implementation. And you give total credit to the people in the Ritchie Brothers organization, the legacy Ritchie Brothers organization, along with the people in the Iron Planet organization who come together at the grassroots level. Because as much as you might have high-level overview or intent, it's really up to those folks to knit it all together and make it work. And you're right, at the outset, you may see where there are differences of opinion, clashes of culture, but everybody's got the same desired outcome in mind. And if they hold the customer up as the sort of key deliverable, satisfying, delighting the customer is the key deliverable, then that's what they work towards. Yeah. And so for us, that's what it was. So you work on the people side, simultaneously you're working on the technology and knitting the technologies together. Simultaneously, you're working on, just your whole go-to-market strategy, your sales strategy. So everything gets worked on.
Yeah, I see you've got a stack of things there, and I was all excited. I thought we were getting a car or something because I walked over and you were showing Corvettes to work.
I was like, ooh.
No, can you go through just some of the acquisitions, just so
Sure.
I'm not even aware of each of them.
And I may not be able to do it justice because we have done a few.
Yeah.
But what I'd say is we have acquisitions that may be in a certain geography. So Western Canada, for example, we've done some acquisitions in the agricultural sector, and then that's the next thing that you might look at is sector acquisitions. So agriculture being a good sector for that. And then there's things that take you into new channels or new markets. So the acquisition of Mascus which was probably 2015, gave us access to the European listing service market, which we did not have in the past. And a real strength of theirs, a really well-trafficked website with a lot of coverage in Europe. So when we've done acquisitions, they've typically focused on either sector, geography, or channel or market. With Iron Planet, the online only auction is not something that Ritchie Brothers had traditionally done, and so that gave us an opportunity to get into that in a way that there was scale already involved.
Right.
They had good coverage in a brand, and it made a lot of sense. We've also found that great technology, great team, great folks to work with. So that one's been fantastic.
What about, can we talk about the one with the cars?
Yeah, sure. So this one was new. This is the beginning of 2018. We bought a company down in Tulsa, Oklahoma called Lake. And Lake was and is the oldest collector car auction in the United States. And we brought on some additional folks. As I said, for our customers, the equipment that they use Monday to Friday and the equipment that they need from Monday to Friday, they can, and we hope they do, acquire it from our auctions Monday to Friday. But with Lake and with Collector Car, it gives us something to interact with our customers on Saturdays and Sundays. Really, these are not things you need to have. These are things that you'd like to have. And so it's great. We've had a number of auctions in sort of Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and Dallas. And for 2020, we've now launched a sale in Scottsdale in mid-January. We're very, very excited. We have a phenomenal package of cars to kick that off, and very much looking forward to it.
To circle back to the technology, when you do an acquisition of a company like Lake, is that how you say it? Just Lake?
Lake.
Yeah. When you do that type of acquisition, I know you said you're not the tech guy,
Right?
but is there quite quickly, or do you know this, if the technology that Ritchie Brothers is using, does it start to quite quickly get transferred into these other companies?
Right. Yeah, and I would say that in some instances we're able to very quickly move the technology platform in its entirety, and that's operating system, financial system, web, everything to that new entity or to that acquired entity. In other instances, you want to be careful about that, and it for a variety of reasons. And so in some cases we hold back. Our technology leader, Marianne Mark, is phenomenal. Really understands where and when to apply the technology in whole or in part, and we listen to Marianne and her team's advice on when we do it. So, for example, with Lake, we've kept their native operating system. It works. It functions. We did do a revamp on the website, for example, to make it a little bit more modern. We worked with the marketing team on the logo. So, it's great to have an organization like Ritchie Brothers with all its various parts that you can apply to an acquisition, and to work with people who are open to some change. That's difficult too.
Yeah.
Have you ever encountered a difficulty having different operating systems for each entity?
Sure. I'd love to tell you that we haven't. We're perfect. But that's, inevitably, there are going to be challenges. And largely that comes because the way that the information gets reported and the systems don't talk to each other means that you've manually got to pull it out. And then you need to make sure that it's the correct information. So if you want to take the inventory from Lake and display it on Ritchie Brothers, that requires some bending and twisting to make it flow over. Yeah. And so now with having the Iron Planet platform, that's actually a little bit easier. That was the back end for Lake when we acquired them. So that was the good part. But you've always got to make sure that you get the information over in a way that customers are comfortable, that our finance people can report on it correctly. Yeah. So,
I want to get into actually. It's a good time to sort of get into your background. 15 years now and you've, we go through your LinkedIn and you see all these things. So I kind of want to get, and that's Gowdy's field.
My favorite part. Okay, yes. Like you said, we're very active on LinkedIn, and I went and I started snooping around. And I've noticed with Ritchie Brothers, you've done it all.
Yeah.
You know, you've
No,
been
sorry, I shouldn't have jumped. Should have jumped.
He's like,
almost.
yes,
Yeah,
I
I know.
have.
Yeah, we're gonna need to edit that one out.
I'm a pro. But you've done, you've been manager, vice president, and now president, and how has that been from where you started with Ritchie Brothers to your position now?
What a ride! Awesome, really awesome. I really love the company. I love the people I work with. Interesting story. So I was at McGill in 2004, graduating, and I wanted to interview with some investment banks, and I contacted my friend Vic, and I said, "Hey Vic, I need a reference as I go forward." And he said, "Great, as long as you interview at Ritchie Brothers as well." And so I came over, and I was living in Tokyo, and I came over and I met with the executive team at the time. And I was just blown away by the story. And I was blown away about the frictionless market and the growth rate. And, there's just a ton of energy. We all went out for lunch. Dave came. And just to sit back and listen to them talk about equipment and talk about markets and everything was just, was really inspiring. And I went back and I just, sort of put the investment bank idea away and really pursued the Ritchie Brothers opportunity. And I was very fortunate in 2004 to get the offer, and I came in the marketing department, really ground level. And my friends and even my father were kind of like, what are you doing? But I just had this idea that Ritchie Brothers was going to provide a ton of opportunity. And I would say, even if I was joining today, it just continues to be a place that you can go and invest your time and your energy and your brain power and get going.
Seeing Ritchie Brothers grow from when you started, what is one thing that you can say that was a major impact? That's what changed Ritchie Brothers.
Oh wow, that's a great question. So, I would say it's tough because technology would be a big one, and I would say the technology, including the simulcast. Our simulcast bidding meant that we could be exposed to those new customers, and that meant we could go into new markets a little bit easier. People knew who we were. They were willing to let us sit down and talk to them about their equipment disposition needs. That global expansion, without that, I don't know that we are who we are today. Certainly, we're not. Right. So that's huge.
Okay. I wanted to know. When you started with Ritchie Brothers and meeting Dave, and I know you kind of touched on that, but can you expand, like, how was that and your first impression and how was it that you said, yes, this is it, this is the company I want to be a part of?
Okay, so I finished that lunch with Dave. I get on a plane, I fly back to Tokyo. I reach out to Vic, probably by email, a week or so later, just to get a little bit of feedback, and he said, you know what, really positive, like, executive team seems like there's a lot of interest. Just one problem, Dave doesn't think so. But don't worry, don't worry. And I'm thinking,
oh no,
his name's on the door. What do you mean, don't worry? But so that actually, I think, incited in me a certain amount of competitive spirit, and I really wanted to get on board. And so I came back, I think, 3 or 4 more times to interview on my own dime to interview.
Really?
It was that. So fast forward, in 2004, when I joined the company, I was doing trade shows, attending a lot of trade shows around North America, but also supporting speakers and things like that. So Dave was going to do a small presentation up in his hometown, Kelowna. I probably hadn't been back very often, but I drove up with the booth, the backdrop, much like what you have, and the PowerPoint presentation on a laptop. Set it all up. I drove over to the airport, and Dave came in. It was probably 2 hours before the presentation was due to start. And so Dave said, well, look, let's drive around. So I'm driving with Dave Ritchie around Kelowna, his hometown. He's showing me, this is where I live. This is where I used to play lacrosse. This is where my friends and I played hockey, everything. I was getting this full tour. And at the same time, he's talking about, the furniture store and how business started. It was just a phenomenal sort of hour and a half or 2 hours. And so we went and did the presentation. And the funny story is we got done and Dave said, I want to thank Christian for setting up the presentation today. And I was wearing a name badge that said Kieran, but that, so somebody came up to me after and said, I thought your name was Christian. And I said, other people call me Kieran, but it's not important. My friends call me Christian. So,
awesome.
yeah, I never told him. And I till today. Sorry, Dave. But no, and he retired not long after that. I stepped down as CEO. He stayed active and remains, in the sense of attending auctions and seeing customers. He still does that today. But obviously, there's a whole new executive team and everything that's come up. We're now a generation or 2 generations removed from that. But Dave's Dave. He's always that reminder of what's important in terms of customers and all that.
Right. And for in the future, what do you think, or where is Ritchie Brothers going, and as a company, and then for you as on a personal level?
Yeah, I think we've started and we talked about RBAS, Ritchie Brothers Asset Solutions, and I think you'll see us continue. Obviously, our core is auction. Asset disposition, but there's also the opportunity for us to expand our services. We have a great business in our Ritchie Brothers financial solutions and our Ritchie Brothers Financial Services, and that provides financing options to our customers, to our buyers. So I think we've done a little bit now in terms of diversification, and now we're getting more diversified away. So we're not just core auction business anymore. That's still a large part of what it is. So I think the future continues to evolve that way. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, I'm hoping after this interview I still have a job, and as long as I do, I think it's all good.
I don't think anybody has had a job after they've come on the show.
See, I would have liked to have known that 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, we don't tell people.
Yeah. Okay. Are you guys hiring?
Sorry, we're after this interview.
Okay, that's great.
I wanted to. You said about Dave stepping down as CEO, and he's years of building up this company, and going through the history, and I think for me it's, I guess in some respects I'm an entrepreneur myself, so you look to people to sort of get not just inspired, because that's not really something I look for, quite honestly, quite a bit, but I look for how do you manage that? And I'm looking from that, you go to the first billion,
mm-hmm.
You go to 1998,
yep.
to, that.
The year we go public.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you go on to the TSX, and then there's the first USA, you go with the first $1 billion quarter
mm-hmm.
in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got a sense, because obviously when did you, what you?
04.
You started the company. Do you get a sense, have you got to have those conversations with how a company like Ritchie Brothers manages that type of just insane growth, and not just it's the financial growth, but the sheer volume of units that they're moving?
Right.
It's staggering.
Yeah, great question. So Dave was the iconic growth-oriented expansion. Don't worry about do we have the right system or do we have the right process in place? Let's just go do it and we'll figure it out. So he's the growth-oriented CEO type personality. He was followed by Peter Blake, and Pete had been with the company since the early 90s, and Pete was process and really helped us as a company consolidate our policies and practices to be able to support both the growth as well as being a publicly traded company, because that was new. Relatively new, 98 to 04.
Now you have people that have a very vested interest.
Correct.
Millions of dollars
Correct.
at stake. Yeah.
Correct. And you've got, your quarterly and annual reporting.
Yeah.
Just all the things you have to do to be a proper public company. At the same time, Sarbanes-Oxley's regulations came in, and so we had to adhere to different risk mitigation things. So Pete did this fantastic job through that period, and that was also a great growth period for us. So they, as an executive team, they reinvested in the business to open additional sites and help us expand our footprint through the U.S., through Europe. across Canada and into Asia, even further than it was in permanent facilities. And that was big. Rather than just putting up a temporary facility, you actually invested in developing, 100 plus or minus acres, sometimes much more than that, as well as going vertical with the proper building to house the auctions, having the yard set up and fenced with an area for receiving. So it was very, very, very organized. And then we get into that period where we now need the next lift. And so Ravi Salagram came in 2014, and Ravi's really the innovator. And Ravi says, okay, we got to push technology, we got to push the business forward. And so that's sort of where we are from 14 to 19, the last 5 years. And again, in each one of those periods, I think our customers benefited from the type of leadership that we had at the time, and continue, I think, to benefit from that.
There's something very interesting from what you're saying, and of course, I'm not there, but I get the sense that Ritchie Brothers was able to keep core values by adding things on. I mean, I've worked as a consultant, and that is I've flown out to customers, and you're in a meeting, and you feel yourself getting circled because they're looking at you going, "Are you going to upset There's maybe a leader in the company that's going, we got to do something new here," and you're thinking, and then you have to have that conversation. I'm trying to tack something on. I'm not trying to pull out your feet from under you, because whatever you've got to hear has worked. Now you're trying to add something on. And Rich, what do you think it is? Is it the leadership that's been chosen, the teams that have been put together? How has Ritchie Brothers, and I'm not just saying this from what you're saying, I pay attention to these markets and that, and I know how people talk about Ritchie Brothers. They still feel that there is an actual personal connection.
Right.
How have they managed to do that with acquisitions, global markets? I mean, just new CEOs, and I mean, how do you do that? Do you see a pattern, a way that they have accomplished it?
Well, I may be cutting my own throat here, but the executives are part of it, but it's really the people on the ground. It's the people in the field, because even if you're doing an acquisition and there's a group involved in that, ultimately the people who greet the customers at the front door,
Right.
The people who go out and speak to the customers in their own offices, they're the people who maintain that culture, that attachment or connection to the customer. That's what's really, really important. And when you bring in a new company, they were likely and are likely still doing that. They didn't get where they got by ignoring customers. So at the core, that's what you've got, is you've got this commonality around the customer as your key focal point. Then there's all the other things you need to do. I mean, there's the financial reporting and that's sort of that nitty-gritty stuff that you've got to do. And as you understand, that's where you put together the right teams. You make sure that you have the right combination of knowledge, personality, etc., to be able to carry those heavier rocks and get them moved. I don't know that we've done it any better or worse than other companies. I mean, certainly, there are case studies out there of probably more focused on failures than successes.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that we are actually a successful acquirer or integrator of companies. As I said earlier, it's not perfect. It's always takes some time. When you think you're all the way through, you're probably not all the way through, and you've got to keep focused on it, because if you start to think about what's instead of looking back, and I don't mean looking back in terms of yesteryear, I mean just you've got to keep some focus on what people need in order to get all the way integrated in.
Yeah. I want to circle back to another question I had about the about actually going back to Gowdy's section about your career. And you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. But again, there are people that watch a show like this, and they're looking at your 14 years with a company, which is longer than a lot of people stay with companies now. So that's one. You said you're on your own dime to, that competitive streak. So that's two. So there's these two key points that right away anybody watching can take if you want to move up. But is there a setback that you've had along the way, most professionals have, where you reset and you got much better. It still sticks with you. Is there anything that stands out in those 14 years,
Ah,
15 years?
I mean, if you had a couch, I'd lie down and I'd go through all this. Look, I think any body who's been in a career over a period of time is going to have setbacks. And so, yes, absolutely. One that pops to my head is, you've got to overcome. You've got to develop some resiliency. And so you're going to hear no. And one of the things I learned is don't fall in love with your own ideas to the point where that's what you're going to die for, unless you're prepared to die for it. And the thing is that sometimes you come up with a great idea. It might be in the middle of the night, it might be as you're driving down the road, and you think, this is it. Eureka. And then it gets challenged naturally. I think that's where you have to make a decision whether you're going to persevere with that idea or without that idea, or whether you're going to give up and sort of capitulate at that point. And so along the way, I would have been challenged. People would have been challenging me. I would have been challenging them. Hopefully we've always done it in a very respectful way, but I can remember a few times where I thought, oh, this is it. Either they're going to run me out or I'm going to quit. Yeah. And, obviously that didn't happen. And, thankfully it didn't happen. Yeah. But that's, that just comes with it. And I think that's the thing that when I'm, whether I'm promoting somebody or looking at somebody's career development, I'm thinking, have they got good resiliency? Can they understand when an idea is half-baked and needs to be challenged? Can they accept that? Yeah. And will they also do the same for me, right? So I'm still going to bring ideas forward. And if they've got the wherewithal to say, hey, I don't think this is the greatest idea, and then, we're probably going to get someplace really great.
Right.
I sometimes these topics that come up at the end of I go, oh, I wish I had talked about this at the beginning, because I have heard. I mean, they make entire movies about people believing in what you're doing, and basically dying on your sword to do it. And I've always thought that I don't know if that sounds right. And yeah, sometimes you do have to fight for your ideas.
Yep.
But what you're saying, I mean, there is a lot of people, probably I'll go even a lot of young people, that have great ideas, and realizing, okay, I can't just die on my sword every time, because you can only die so many times.
Yep.
And it's funny because I've never actually heard that answer. That just that willingness to go, okay, I got to keep going, even though maybe my idea is not being taken today.
Yep.
Sometimes those ideas, I'm not specific, but have you looked back when I'm glad they didn't take that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wrote was involved in 2 business plans in 2004, and I thought there was one in there that was that was eureka. We've done it. We've unlocked the next billion, and it went upstairs to the executive team, the two plans, and I thought the second one was more of a throwaway, if you will, and I got some feedback from the president at the time, and he said, I really don't like that idea, the one that I liked. And he didn't know that I'd been involved. He said, I really don't like that. I've told these guys before, we're not going to do that. But this other one over here, this has legs. Like, we should do this. And I'm thinking, well, okay. And then they said, later he came down and said, sorry, I didn't know you'd been involved. And he said, do you want to take this on? And so that was my first foray into sales at Ritchie Brothers, was real estate auction. And I knew nothing about real estate. Sorry, I shouldn't have told them that before. But that I worked with a great team, and we started doing real estate auction in British Columbia and Alberta. We have a great team that still continues to do that today. But that was absolutely one of those times where I thought I was in love with an idea, and I very quickly pivoted to the idea that I didn't think, and took and made that my life.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad I asked that question, because it's actually a very, again, I hope people actually the people that are watching it, I think there's a lot of value, especially if you're trying to move up in your career. I want to close with one thing. Before Ian and we were sitting out there with Rory and getting ready for the interview. And when you're talking about this, to give people an idea of the scale that Ritchie Brothers, the amount they're moving.
Right.
So I can't really think of a better way to end it than this. And do you mind going into just not all of them, but this is the one example in Edmonton alone?
Right.
How much product they're moving through that? Are those are public numbers, right?
Yeah, so we had a sale in October that was, in September that was over 10,000 lots sold. And Edmonton does a sale about every 6 weeks. So we just are concluding today, which is the Friday, we're concluding the 5th day of yet another close to 10,000 lot sale. So 6 weeks after we just sold 10,000 lots. So that team, both on the sales and the operations, has this flywheel going where they are getting the equipment in from their consigners, getting it delivered, getting it lined up because it all gets lined up beautifully.
Yeah.
Getting the lot stickers on it, getting the catalogs made, getting all the customers coming in, registering, bidding, buying, purchasing, paying, getting titles turned, and then picking it up and taking it back out again. And if you took a time lapse, and I think we've done this in a few places, of that inflow and outflow, it's like the tide of equipment coming in and going out, and there's this team there just making sure it flows, trying to do it as safely as humanly possible. And we just can't stress enough how important that safety is as we see equipment rolling in and rolling out again. And they do that 6 times a year, as we said, and it's 2 ramps, which is the only one in the world. So they've got a ramp that faces the north, and they've got a ramp that faces the south, and then there's a 3rd ring going on in the virtual theater, and then there's the timed auction theater, which is kiosks or mobile devices and computers that people can bid on. So at any one time, you can have 4 lots or 4 rings going on at the same time. It is just amazing. If you haven't been there, and we invited you both and all of you to come out, it is quite the show.
Well, and I want to circle down at the beginning of the show. You talked about there was 2002. They're talking about rolling out online, and they thought 10% that high.
Right.
Where does it get up to now?
Yeah. So Edmonton in the last sale was something north of 75% was bought by online bidders. And we still believe that people are coming and physically inspecting much of that equipment. We hope they are. I mean, it's up to them to ascertain that suitability and condition. But just in terms of giving them the time back in their lives, if that's how they choose to use it and they go back to the office or whatnot to bid, there it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you both.
I'll make a confession as well. Thank you for letting us use your parking lot. My wife learned to ride a bike in your parking lot.
That's as long as it's done safely, we're fine.
No, she had a helmet, everything, and it was very slow.
That's good. That's good. I thought you were going to say drive a stick or something, but
No,
a bike's a different deal.
No, just a pedal bike.
Very good.
It's a beautiful facility. It's near where I live. It's a beautiful facility. Ritchie Brothers is truly an amazing company, an amazing story. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much. Gowdy,
you.
thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to do a sign off to this camera.
Yes.
Well, I had fun. Hopefully you did too. Hopefully Karen did. Did you have fun?
I did. Very much.
Great questions. Sometimes you ask that question, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's good. Okay, so watch out for what we have coming up. We have the Hit 2020, which is our heavy industry tour. If you're,
Exciting.
I know there's a high percentage of you that do watch right to the end, and you're still listening to us.
Yes.
So, you can nominate yourself to be part of that. We want to involve the communities. We want to involve companies. So let us know that. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for watching. We also have Mining Now. That's getting rolled out.
Yeah,
You've just
soon.
finishing getting 3 of those episodes.
Yeah,
so those
we've
are
got
ready to
a couple
go.
more edits and we'll be good.
So we're staying busy. Thank you very much to Karen Holmes for coming on the show.
Home.
Oh, did I say Holmes again?
You did.
My brain actually said, that's ridiculous. Okay. I really need to work on that. And thank you for Ritchie Brothers for agreeing to be part of this. We're really excited to see how you like the interview.
Yes.
And Gowdy, where can people follow, comment, berate us, whatever they want to do?
Wow, I feel like I haven't done this in so long that I don't remember.
I know.
Okay, so yes, you can follow us on internet,
really-
apparently.
We'll have to start the
On
whole show over again.
Instagram, yes, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all at Crownsman P. We've got our Facebook group, the Crownsman Podcast. Please join. We've got great stuff going on there. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got an episode a week, and all our Crownsman specials and Mining Now will be featured on there as well. Then we've got, if you don't want to watch and you just want to listen, you can listen to us on Anchor. Am I ready for this? Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Castbox, Pocket Casts, and many, many more.
Many more. Okay. In the Facebook group, we have a Facebook group called the Crownsman Podcast. That's just a lot of fun. We got to start doing some giveaways from that, so join up with that. Thank you for watching, everybody. We will see you on the next episode, and thank you for your support.